Rain was falling hard outside the big courthouse in Chicago. The gray sky looked heavy, and puddles formed on the steps. Inside, everything smelled of wood and old papers. I walked slowly behind my son, Daniel. He leaned on his cane, his body weak but his back still straight. Every step he took looked painful, and it broke my heart to see him that way. Around us, people whispered. "That's the Lopez divorce," one woman said softly. "His wife is taking him for everything." I kept my head high, though my heart was shaking inside me. The courtroom was almost full. Reporters sat in the back, holding their notepads, ready to write about the fall of a once successful architect. But when I stepped through the doorway, the room changed. Judge Raymond Cole, a man with gray hair and cold eyes, froze the moment he saw me. His voice caught mid-sentence. For a second, he just stared, and then he said in a low, almost trembling voice, "Why are you here?" The whole courtroom fell silent. I saw the surprise on everyone's faces. Some people began to whisper again, this time in shock. "That's her. Maria Lopez. The Iron Prosecutor. I thought she was gone for good." I said nothing. I only looked at the judge, and in his eyes, I saw the same disbelief I felt. It had been more than 20 years since I had last stood in a courtroom like this. I had promised myself that I never would again. But life has a strange way of bringing you back to the places you tried hardest to forget. My son Daniel sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered, and I wanted to hold him like I did when he was a boy. But I knew he didn't need a mother's hug right now. He needed strength. I sat beside him, placed my worn handbag on the table, and waited. My heart was heavy, but my mind was calm. I could feel all the eyes on me. They were wondering what I was doing there. Why the woman once known as the Iron Prosecutor had returned after disappearing for 2 decades. They didn't know the truth yet. They didn't know I wasn't here for glory or fame. I was here for my son. Years ago, Daniel had everything he wanted. He was a young architect with a big dream, a lovely wife, and a small son, Leo. He worked hard and built his company from nothing. I was proud of him. But one cold winter morning, everything changed. Daniel was at one of his construction sites when the scaffolding gave way. He fell 3 stories. When I got the call, I dropped the phone and ran out of the house without even locking the door. At the hospital, I saw my son lying still, wrapped in white bandages, his face pale as paper. The doctor said both his legs were broken badly. He might never walk the same again. I remember holding his hand and whispering, "It's okay, son. You're alive. That's all that matters." But life didn't agree with me. The accident ended his business. Clients left, bills grew, and the laughter that once filled his house disappeared. At first, Emma, his wife, stayed by his side. She cooked for him, helped him move around, told him he'd recover soon. But as months passed, her patience thinned. She began dressing up, going out often, saying she needed fresh air. Her phone rang late at night, and she would step outside to answer it. I pretended not to notice, but I knew. I could see the coldness in her eyes. One evening, while I was helping Daniel with his exercises, Emma threw a file on the table. "It's over," she said flatly. "I'm filing for divorce." Daniel stared at her in silence. "I can't live like this," she continued. "You can't work. You can't give Leo a future. The house is mine too. Half of it. I deserve that much." I felt something snap inside me. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. That house, Daniel had built it with his own hands. He worked late nights, saved every dollar to buy that land. He wanted Leo to grow up in a home filled with love. Now she wanted to take it away. I said nothing to Emma that day. I only watched as she left the room, her heels clicking against the floor. But that night, when Daniel was asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the small cross on the wall. I remembered the promise I made to myself 20 years ago, that I would never set foot in a courtroom again. Back then, I had been a prosecutor. They called me the Iron Prosecutor because I never lost a case. But my success came at a price. My husband, who was also a lawyer, became jealous of my fame. He got involved with a group of businessmen accused of fraud, and when I tried to expose them, he betrayed me. He gave the judge false documents, making it look like I had taken bribes. The same judge was Raymond Cole. I still remember his face as he read the verdict that destroyed my career. I lost everything: my job, my friends, my name. The only thing I didn't lose was my son. Daniel was still young then, and I swore I'd raise him right, away from lies and corruption. I packed away my law books and my old files, locked them in a wooden chest, and promised never to open them again. I thought those days were over forever. But when I saw the court notice, the divorce papers, the demand for the house, the fight for Leo, I felt that old fire return. My hands trembled as I opened that chest for the first time in years. The smell of old paper filled the air. My law license, faded and folded, lay on top. Beneath it were letters, case notes, and my badge. I touched them gently, like touching old scars. The past came flooding back. The trials, the speeches, the victories, the betrayal. I closed my eyes and whispered, maybe fate wanted me here again. Now, sitting in that courtroom, I knew I was where I was meant to be. Judge Cole was still staring at me. He cleared his throat and looked down at his papers, but I saw the fear in his eyes. Maybe he remembered what happened all those years ago. Maybe he felt guilty. I didn't know, and I didn't care. All I cared about was Daniel and little Leo. I leaned toward my son and whispered, "Don't worry, Daniel. I'm here now." He looked at me, confused but comforted. He didn't know yet what I was planning. He didn't know that the woman sitting next to him wasn't just his mother. She was someone who had fought monsters before, and won. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Inside, the courtroom was quiet except for the sound of the judge's pen scratching paper. The storm had already begun, but I was ready. Whatever it took, I was not going to let my son lose everything. She came late, the last to enter before the bailiff shut the heavy doors. The room seemed to tilt toward her when she walked in. Emma wore a scarlet dress that caught every light in the courtroom. A diamond bracelet flashed on her wrist each time she moved her hand. People glanced up from their phones. Even the reporters lifted their heads. She liked being seen. You could tell. Beside her stood a tall woman in a sharp black suit, Victoria Brandt. I knew the type from another life. Calm face. Cold eyes. Every word measured to cut, not to speak. When Daniel rose, wincing, one hand pressed to the wooden bench, Emma leaned toward Victoria and smiled, a small, cruel smirk. She didn't wait to lower her voice. "He'll lose both the house and the boy," she said. "He's already half a man." The words slid across the room like a knife. Daniel's mouth tightened, but he kept his eyes on the judge's bench. I felt the blood rush to my face. In my pocket, my fingers closed around my rosary until the beads hurt. Not this time, I told myself. Not again. Victoria guided Emma to the defendant's table like a queen to her throne. Emma crossed her legs and draped one arm over the back of the chair. She didn't look at Daniel. She looked at me. Her eyes said, "I know who you were, and it doesn't matter anymore." I held her gaze and didn't blink. The judge took the bench, and the first motions began: simple scheduling, an argument about discovery. Victoria's voice was smooth as glass. She kept glancing at Daniel as if he were a spreadsheet with bad numbers. I wrote notes I didn't need to write, just to keep my hands still. The red dress in the corner of my eye burned like a warning light. When the hearing ended, Emma slid on her sunglasses though there was no sun inside the courthouse. She touched Victoria's arm, laughed at something I couldn't hear, and walked out without looking back. We didn't speak on the way home. Rain had cleaned the sky, but the streets still carried the shine of the storm. Daniel stared through the window at the gray city as if trying to find his old life in the reflections. His cane lay across his lap. The rubber tip had frayed. I'd meant to replace it and hadn't. He kept running his thumb over the worn spot like it could answer him. At home I made soup, the simple kind he used to like when he studied late: chicken, noodles, carrots cut small. He picked at it. The spoon clicked the bowl in a slow rhythm until the sound made me want to scream. Finally he put the spoon down. "She told Leo I'm dangerous," he said, not looking at me. "That I could fall and crush him. that I might get angry because of the pain and hit him without meaning to. I felt the chair tilt under me. When did she say that? Last week. Then again yesterday. He asked me if I was safe to hug. His voice cracked. Safe to hug, Mom. He pressed his hand over his eyes like he could hold the tears inside by force. I wanted to take his head in my hands the way I did when he was small and feverish, when I could fix things with a cool cloth and a lullaby. But he was a man, and men have to keep some kind of shape when they cry, or the world will take even that from them. I stood and washed the dishes instead. The water ran and ran. Later, when the house was quiet, I heard a small sound down the hall. A hiccuping breath. I walked soft to Leo's room and stood in the doorway. The rocket ship nightlight made a blue moon on his wall. He had pulled the blanket over his head, but it trembled with his sobs. I sat on the edge of the bed and lifted a corner. Grandma. His face was wet, his lashes stuck together. I'm here, I said. I'm not going anywhere. He sniffed. Mom says if I talk to Daddy, they'll take me away. She says there are people who take kids from bad houses. She says the judge listens to moms more. I see, I said, though my whole body wanted to shout. And what do you think? He hesitated, then whispered, I think Daddy is sad, not bad. I think he needs me to hold his hand when he walks to the kitchen. My throat closed. I brushed his hair back. You are very brave, I said. And very smart. Will they take me if I tell the judge I love Daddy? His voice was so small I had to bend to hear it. No, I said, steady as I could. No one will take you for telling the truth. He looked at the nightlight. Mom says truth is different in court. I swallowed hard. Not when I'm there. He studied my face a long time like he was deciding if I could keep that promise. Then he nodded and slid his hand into mine under the blanket. We stayed like that until his breath slowed. I waited until he slept, then sat a while longer, counting each inhale, each exhale, like a prayer. The house creaked when I went back down the hall. Old houses talk to you if you listen. They warn you when something is wrong. Tonight the stairs warned me about time. We were running out of it. In my room the wooden chest waited in the corner where it always sat, patient as a grave. The lid carried a scratch from the day I pushed it away and swore I would never open it again. I touched that scratch. I had made it with my wedding ring, yanking my hand back like the wood had burned me. I had been angry then, at the court, at the judge, at my husband, at myself. Mostly at myself. I had put the anger in the chest and hammered it shut. I pulled the chest forward and lifted the lid. The smell rose warm and dry. Paper, leather, dust that carries stories. On top lay the thin plastic sleeve with my old attorney ID, the picture a younger stranger with steady eyes. I held it and felt the past come up through the floorboards. The woman in the photo had thought law was a clean blade. She learned it was a field knife. You used it in mud, and sometimes it left a mark on you too. I spread the contents on the bed. Legal pads with my tight writing. A small stapler that still had staples. Case summaries with yellow highlights that had faded to the color of tea. The tools of a life I had buried. My hands remembered them before my mind did. I sorted without thinking, like a seamstress who has worked too many nights by lamplight to forget where the needles live. I caught my reflection in the dark window. Gray hair, tired face, a line between my eyes that had not been there before. I lifted the ID and held it next to my cheek. I swore never to return, I said to the glass. The room made no answer. The city hummed its secret song, sirens far off, a train crossing somewhere, rain still whispering in the gutters. I set the ID down and closed my fingers around the edge of the dresser, the way you brace when the wave hits. But for my son, I said, voice low, each word a step forward, I will. The words didn't make me bigger or younger. They didn't make me brave. They made me honest. And honesty is a kind of armor, plain and heavy and hard to break. I took out my old fountain pen. I checked the nib on my thumb. The ink left a small black crescent like a new moon. I pulled a legal pad close and wrote a list. Property deed, date of purchase, date of marriage. Mortgage statements, amount paid down before wedding. Business records, accident report, insurance letters, client emails. medical reports, mobility prognosis, treatment plan, school records, Leo's attendance, teacher notes, drawings, texts, voicemails, any threats, any coaching, third-party witness, neighbor, teacher, family doctor, financial trail, Emma's spending spike, unknown deposits. Associate, find the source of the red bracelet and the hotel in her photos. I underlined the last one twice. People think lies are invisible. They forget lies need money, and money leaves footprints. I slid open the small drawer in my nightstand and took out the cheap phone I kept for emergencies. I had not used it in years. The battery light blinked at me like a sleepy eye. I plugged it in, waited, then scrolled to a number I had never erased. Tom Reyes answered on the second ring. His voice was the same, sandpaper and smoke. Lopez. It's me, I said. A beat, then a low laugh. I wondered when you'd call. I need a look at someone's accounts, I said. Nothing loud. Nothing that leaves a scent. Who's the someone? Emma. He made a small sound. The wife. The red dress, I said. The red dress, he repeated. And what am I looking for? Transfers, hotel bills, flights, jewelry purchases. A name will float up eventually. It always does. Usual fee. At 10% for speed. He whistled softly. You must be serious. I am. He paused. You sure you want back in? It's not cleaner than when you left. It doesn't have to be clean, I said. It has to be done. We set a time to talk again. I ended the call and stood a moment in the quiet. Then I turned back to the bed, organized the papers into stacks, clipped and labeled them. I moved in a careful rhythm until the chaos became a shape I could hold. Before I slept, I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror again. Water ran in the sink, a thin ribbon of sound. I pressed my palms to the counter. The woman who stared back at me wasn't the iron prosecutor. She was a mother who had run out of safe choices. I thought of the judge's eyes when he saw me, the flicker of fear there. I thought of Emma's smile as she told Victoria I would lose my son and my grandson. I thought of Leo's hand gripping mine under the blanket. I said it one last time, to myself, to the night, to the house that was listening, I will. Then I turned off the light and let the dark hold me up until morning. The first hearing felt like walking into a cold river. The air was sharp, and every sound carried. Daniel sat stiff beside me, his cane leaning against the table, his hands folded to keep them from shaking. Emma sat across the aisle with Victoria Brandt at her side. Victoria rose like she owned the room. Daniel Lopez is incapacitated, physically and financially, she said. Her voice didn't rise or fall. It just cut. He cannot work, cannot provide, and has been living off dwindling savings. My client has carried the burden long enough. Each word landed on my son like a stone. I kept my eyes on the table so I wouldn't look at him and see the hurt I could not fix with a touch. I was not listed as counsel. I was just a mother sitting in the spectator row, hands folded, back straight, waiting for the moment the ground would stop tilting. Victoria kept going. She talked about timelines and bank accounts, medical reports and unpaid invoices. She said risk and unstable and unsafe. She said the child the way a person says asset. Emma nodded as if this were a weather report and she was simply agreeing that clouds were clouds. When Daniel tried to rise, Victoria lifted a finger and the judge told him to sit. I felt the old heat climb into my chest, the one that used to carry me through closing arguments. I pressed my palm against my ribs as if I could hold it where it belonged. When I finally looked up, Judge Cole was staring at me. For a second, he looked like a man who had seen a ghost step through the wall. His pen paused. His throat moved. He said nothing, but the tremor in his voice when he spoke again told me everything. He remembered. And he was afraid of that memory. Victoria slid a packet across the table to the clerk. We move for an emergency asset freeze, she said. All property and accounts to be held pending final orders. We also request exclusive possession of the marital home for my client and the child during these proceedings. My son went white. His fingers fumbled for the cane. I could hear his breath change. The words didn't just freeze assets. They froze his future. The clerk stamped the motion. The sound echoed like a hammer in a workshop. That was the moment the river got too cold to bear. I stood. The wooden chair scraped back, a small sound that still seemed to slice the air. I felt every eye turn. I did not raise my voice. I spoke the way you speak to a line that has already been drawn. Your Honor, I said, I will represent my son. A gasp ran through the room, soft, then louder, like wind catching dry leaves. Someone whispered my name and then hissed it again to a friend who didn't believe it the first time. Emma's head jerked toward me. Victoria's mouth closed into a hard line. She knew the name too. Even the bailiff shifted his weight like a man who has suddenly remembered an old story. Judge Cole's hand tightened on the gavel. It rattled the block when he set it down. He glanced at the clerk, then back at me. Mrs. Lopez, he said, careful and thin. You are not. I will file my appearance, I said. Today. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I will not allow an emergency order to strip my son of shelter or his child of truth. Silence spread out from the bench like a cool cloth. Then the judge cleared his throat and spoke to the clerk about scheduling and filings and temporary measures. The motion did not pass that day. It was taken under advisement. The words were a small bridge over a deep drop. It would hold, for now. When we stepped out into the hallway, the light looked different, like someone had turned the sky up one shade. Daniel leaned into me without meaning to. Mom, he whispered. What are you doing? What I should have done the day she handed you those papers, I said. I am walking back into the room. That night, after the house quieted and Leo's door clicked shut, the past rose to meet me like a tide that had finally found the shore again. I stood alone in the kitchen, palms on the counter, eyes on nothing. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed and the headlights drew a slow square across the ceiling. 20 years slid in and sat down. I remembered the case that broke me. The city contracts. The shell companies. The brown envelopes that moved like small boats from hand to hand. I had followed the money because money doesn't know how to lie. It points. It always points. My husband, God, it still hurt to use the word, had told me to leave it alone. Don't make enemies you can't outrun, he said, smiling that terrible careful smile. I didn't listen. I brought the names to the office. I wrote the charges. I walked into court certain that the law was a light switch. On. Off. Right. Wrong. He flipped it on me. He gave documents to the defense, false ones with my name on signatures I didn't write, gifts I didn't take. He whispered to the right people at the right dinner. He handed the judge a neat path to a neat verdict. And Judge Cole walked it. He read the judgment in a voice that didn't belong to him, and it landed on me like a roof. Disbarment. Reputation snapped like a branch in winter. The papers called me a warning. The friends stopped calling. My husband packed a bag for a conference and didn't come home. I fought for 2 years. I clawed back my name in the smallest pieces. One letter, one affidavit, one admission, one leak. The judge who had signed my fall left the bench for health reasons. I found the truth not in a courtroom but in a storage unit with a bad lock and a box with the wrong label. It cleared me. It did not give me back what I had lost. Pride doesn't grow back the way hair does. Neither does trust. I closed my eyes at the sink and let the pictures pass. They did not hurt the way they used to. They were old bones now. They told me the weather and kept me honest. When I opened my eyes, the kitchen was the kitchen again. The house breathed. The night held. Morning brought coffee and lists and the clean hum of purpose. I called Tom Reyes at 9, and by 9:05 he was already tapping at a keyboard on the other end of the line. He did not ask for many details. Old friends don't need maps when they know the terrain. I want spending patterns, I said. Luxury goods, hotel chains, flights, cash transfers. New accounts opened in the last 12 months. Names on the other ends. Especially names tied to real estate. You think she's moving the board under you, he said. I think someone promised her a new life and told her our house is a down payment, I said. Find the person who made that promise. He grunted. Give me 48. He took 36. 3 days later, I sat in a small table by the window at a coffee shop that smelled like burnt sugar and rain-wet coats. Tom slid into the seat opposite me with a folder under his arm and a tired satisfaction in his eyes. Redstone Properties, he said without preamble. He tapped the folder. Shell on a shell. Looks like a development group. Acts like a drain. Money in from small investors. Money out to quiet hands. Your Emma received 3 transfers from a related entity called East Point Advisors. Same signers, same accountant. Not a salary. Not a loan. Consulting fees. He fanned the papers across the table. Bank statements. Screenshots. A spreadsheet printed in gray lines. My finger found the numbers without needing to read the headings. They told a simple story. Money left places it did not belong and arrived where it could make a mess. Hotels, Tom said, passing another set. 2 in Milwaukee. 1 in Indianapolis. 1 right here, Gold Coast. Same guest with her 3 times, Lucas Pierce. Redstone's partner. He books the room. She pays the bar. He pays the spa. She pays the boutique. They sign the bill together and don't even bother to hide the handwriting. He slid a thin envelope next. Flight confirmations. He moves. She follows. Short trips. Weeknights. Whoever is minding the child when she's out, it isn't your son. The last page was a photograph taken with a long lens and a steady hand. Emma stepping out of a car in a dress I had not seen before, green this time, laughing up at a man with neat hair and a phone still in his palm. Lucas, I assumed. He looked like a man who thinks the world is happy to hold his coat. I lifted the photo and held it a moment, not because I needed the picture but because I needed the weight. Proof is heavy in the hand. It quiets rage. It turns noise into work. Anything on the house? I asked. Tom nodded. Draft agreement. Not signed. Redstone to purchase your son's property at a low valuation as is to assist with medical debt. 2 months from now, the deed would be recorded to a new LLC and they'd resell after cosmetic work. Big flip. Quick profit. He tapped the side of the folder. Someone got impatient and put it in email. I printed it before they remembered to delete. The coffee shop's window fogged where my breath hit it. Outside, a bus hissed and pulled away. People went where they were going, umbrellas blooming and closing in slow flowers. Inside, my hands were steady. I closed the folder and slid it into my leather briefcase. The old one. The one that had sat under my bed like a buried bell. I had polished it the night before without meaning to. The surface still showed its years, scuffs, a corner darkened by time. But the latch clicked like it always had. Clean, final, sure. Good work, I said. Tom shrugged like a man who does not trust praise in public. There's more I can dig if you want. But this will move a judge. It will, I said. And it will move me. When I got home, I spread the papers on the kitchen table the way I had the night before. But this time they made a different kind of map. Deeds and dates. Transfers and names. A dumb, bright line from promise to theft. I stacked them in the order a judge would want to hear them. Not the order my anger wanted to tell. I wrote a motion. I drafted an affidavit. I listed exhibits. I called the clerk and reserved time. I typed slowly at first and then faster, the way you walk when you realize your legs still know the road. I checked each citation twice. I did not leave room for the small mistake that lets a lie slip through. When I finished, I slid everything into the briefcase and stood to test the weight. It pulled at my shoulder, familiar and right. Daniel came in from the hall, moving carefully. You're working, he said, as if naming the scene might make it less strange. I am, I answered. Tomorrow we take this to court. He looked at the briefcase and then at me. I saw the question in his eyes. Are you sure? And I answered it before he could ask. I know what I'm walking into, I said. And I know who I am when I walk there. He nodded once. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He reached out and put his hand over mine on the handle. His palm was warm. The house was quiet. Somewhere in the back, a faucet dripped like a soft clock. I lifted the case. The latch held. The past did not push me backward. It stood up behind me and kept its hand on my shoulder, steadying, not steering. Tomorrow would be another cold river. But I had learned something about rivers. You don't wait for them to warm. You go in, breath held, eyes open, and you keep moving until your feet find the far bank. The night before the trial, the house would not rest. The clock in the hallway ticked like a slow heartbeat. Pipes breathed in the walls. A wind came down the street and lifted the edge of the old roof. It sounded like someone sighing. I lay awake and watched the shadow of the maple tree move across the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the courtroom, the judge, the red dress, the gavel. I told myself to sleep. My body did not believe me. Near midnight I heard a whisper. It was small, the kind of voice a child uses when he thinks the dark is listening. I stood and followed the sound to Leo's room. The door was open a finger's width. I could see the glow of the rocket nightlight. I could see his stuffed bear sitting on the pillow like a quiet friend. Mom said if I tell the judge I love Daddy, he whispered to the bear, I'll never see her again. The words were so soft they almost broke. I felt them pass through me the way cold passes through thin cloth. I stepped inside. He did not see me. He was turned toward the wall, speaking into the dark the way lonely people do. I took my phone from my pocket. My hands shook a little, not from fear but from rage that had nowhere to go. I tapped the record button. The red dot glowed like a small, stubborn star. I don't want to lie, he told the bear. I don't want to say Daddy scares me. Daddy doesn't scare me. He just walks slow now. I can walk slow with him. Silence stretched. I could hear his breath hitch and settle. I wish Grandma could talk for me, he said after a long time. Grandma knows the real rules. I stopped the recording and slid the phone back in my pocket. It felt heavier than before. Proof always does. I sat on the edge of his bed and laid my palm over his hair. He turned at once, like a flower to light, and blinked up at me. Grandma, he said, half asleep, half crying. I heard you, I said. I'm sorry you had to say those things alone. He swallowed. Will they take me if I tell the truth? No, I said, and my voice was steady because it had to be. No one will take you for telling the truth. Tomorrow you will speak with the judge, and you will tell him exactly what you told your bear. I will be there. Do you understand? I will be right there. He nodded, and the wet on his lashes caught the light. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. His skin was warm and smelled like soap and crayons. It smelled like a life we were trying to keep whole. Sleep now, I said. Tomorrow we walk together. He reached for my hand and held my finger. It took only a minute for sleep to find him again. I sat until his grip loosened and the room went back to its soft blue. Then I stood and left, closing the door without a sound. In my room I set the phone on the dresser and watched the small red icon blink out as the screen went dark. I tucked the device into my briefcase with the printed bank papers and the deed and the notes I had written in black ink. I put out the light and lay down and told myself the same thing I had told Leo. Tomorrow, we walk together. It was not sleep that came to me then. It was a kind of stillness. It held until dawn. The courthouse buzzed like a hive the next morning. Reporters clustered by the steps, cameras hanging from their necks, voices low and eager. Inside, the hallways smelled like wet wool and coffee. The courtroom filled early. People who did not know us found seats and settled in as if for a show. The bailiff called for order. The scrape of chairs made a rough music and then faded. I wore a plain navy suit. It fit me like an old truth. My shoes were sensible. My hair was pinned back the way I used to wear it when I needed the world to look only at my words. I carried the leather briefcase, and when I set it down the latch made its clean, sure sound. Daniel touched my arm and then withdrew his hand. He did not need to say anything. We had already said what mattered. Victoria stood when the judge entered, her expression as smooth as any statue's. Emma sat beside her in another bright dress. Today it was blue, sharp as glass. She did not look at Daniel. She looked at the reporters, at the people, at the air that held their attention. Her smile was small and careful. The judge took the bench. He did not look at me at first. He kept his eyes on the docket and the clock. When he finally raised them, they found mine. And in that short look I saw what the night must have been for him too. A long road walked alone. We dealt with the simple things first, the filings, the appearances, the notes of counsel. My motion for reinstatement, filed under a special statute, lay on the clerk's desk. The judge read the order into the record. My license was active for this case, under supervision. My name belonged in that room. Victoria's mouth bent in a smile that was not a smile at all. Disbarred lawyers don't belong here, she said, loud enough for the back row to hear. I kept my hands on the table. Then you haven't read the reinstatement order, I said softly. There was a small ripple, the kind people try to swallow in a courtroom but cannot. The judge lifted a hand, not to scold, but to settle. Proceed, Mrs. Lopez. I rose. My voice reached the far wall without trying. I had learned long ago that a voice does not need to be large to be heard. It needs to be clear. Exhibit A, I said, and placed the property deed on the evidence table. Date of purchase, 2 years before the marriage. Payments made solely from my son's earnings. No marital funds used for down payments or improvements prior to the accident. The house is his separate property. The clerk took the papers. The judge marked them. Across the aisle, Emma shifted. Victoria wrote something and underlined it twice. Exhibit B, I said, and laid down the bank statements, the transfer logs, the screenshots. Funds received by Mrs. Lopez from East Point Advisors, a related entity to Redstone Properties. Not declared as income. Time to coincide with trips and hotel stays with Mr. Lucas Pierce, Redstone's partner. A draft agreement to purchase the marital home at a below-market price, with an immediate resale through a fresh LLC. This is a scheme, Your Honor. It wears a suit, but it is a theft. A low murmuring moved through the room and then died when the gavel tapped once against the block. The judge's eyes were on the pages. He did not look up. He did not need to. The numbers spoke a language he knew. I lifted the phone last. It felt small in my palm. Exhibit C, I said. An audio recording. Leo Lopez, age 7, speaking alone in his bedroom to a toy. His mother's statements to him are not in that clip. But his words reflect what he was told and feared. They show coercion. They show pressure that no child should carry. Victoria was on her feet at once. Objection, hearsay, foundation. The child will testify, I said. This goes to state of mind and to the pattern of coercion. The judge considered. Overruled for the limited purpose of it, he said. His voice was steady. Play it. I tapped the screen and turned the speaker toward the bench. The room went quiet so fast it almost made a sound. The recording was clear. Leo's small voice filled the space like a candle in a dark church. Mom said if I tell the judge I love Daddy, I'll never see her again, he whispered. A woman in the second row put her hand over her mouth. A reporter dropped his pen. Emma's jaw moved like she had bitten something too hard. Victoria's pen stopped scratching. I don't want to lie, the little voice said. Daddy doesn't scare me. He just walks slow now. I can walk slow with him. When the clip ended, the quiet did not break. It deepened. Even the building seemed to listen a second more, as if it needed to be sure the sound was really gone. I locked the phone and set it down. My throat burned, but I kept my face still. I looked at the judge. He looked at the child's father. He looked, finally, at the child's mother. Victoria found her voice. Your Honor, this is manipulation. The judge lifted his hand. Sit down, Ms. Brandt. He turned toward the back of the room. Bring in the child, he said to the bailiff. Leo came through the side door in a blue shirt buttoned wrong, one button off at the top. His shoes made small, soft sounds. He walked the way he always did when he was trying to be brave, too straight, too careful, as if the air itself might be watching to see if he did it right. He looked at me first. I smiled with my eyes because the rest of my face could not move. Do you know what it means to tell the truth? The judge asked him gently. Leo nodded. It means you say what really happened, even if someone gets mad. The judge blinked. And do you promise to tell me only the truth today? Yes, Leo said. He twisted his fingers together once and then let them go. The questions were simple. The answers were simpler. Did he feel safe with his father? Yes. Did he want to spend time with his father? Yes. Had anyone told him what to say to the judge? He looked down. The pause was a living thing. Then he lifted his head and found me in the sea of faces. "I want to stay with Daddy," he whispered. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The words slid across the room and settled everywhere at once. A sound moved through the benches, somewhere between a sigh and a prayer. I felt it lift and pass and leave a clean space behind. I did not cry. Not then. But the tears were there, burning a line from the back of my eyes to the roof of my mouth. I held them the way I had held my son's pain years ago, with both hands and no noise. Victoria was on her feet again. Objection, leading, coaching, this child. "Enough," the judge said, and this time his voice cracked on the word. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Enough." He leaned forward, elbows on the bench, fingers linked, the way a man does when he is tired of lies and ready for light. "The truth has been spoken," he said. No one moved. The gavel did not fall. It did not need to. The room understood what those words meant. The next part would be paper and orders and signatures. But the heart of it had already happened. A small boy had stood in a large room and told the simplest thing he knew. And for once, the world had listened. The courtroom was still when the judge returned. The jury box sat empty. This was his to decide. Papers whispered as he settled behind the bench. Daniel sat beside me, his fingers locked around the handle of his cane. Across the aisle, Emma kept her eyes on the floor. The air felt thick enough to touch. Judge Cole's voice was quiet at first, the tone of a man who has carried something heavy a long way. After review of the evidence, testimony, and exhibits, he said, "This court reaches its decision." Every sound in the room stopped, even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. "The petition for dissolution of marriage is granted," he continued. "Custody of the minor child, Leo Lopez, is awarded solely to Daniel Lopez. The child's best interests are clear." Emma's head jerked up. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't move. "The property at 2140 West Belmont Avenue," Judge Cole went on, "is declared the premarital asset of Daniel Lopez. No spousal claim shall stand. Financial misconduct has been proven. Spousal support is denied. Mrs. Lopez is granted supervised visitation only, pending review by the family counselor." He paused. The courtroom breathed once and then went silent again. "The gavel falls," he said softly. And then it did. The sound cracked through the room like thunder after a long storm. I felt the air rush out of my chest. For the first time in 20 years, the scales had balanced. Justice, slow, scarred, but still alive, had found its way back to me. Daniel's shoulders slumped. The tremor left his hands. Leo, sitting with the social worker, smiled the small, uncertain smile of a child who has waited too long to feel safe. Across the aisle, Emma rose abruptly. Her chair screeched against the floor. "This isn't over," she snapped, her voice shaking. "You'll all regret this." She turned on her heel and stormed toward the doors. Cameras followed her. Victoria hurried after, papers falling from her hands. Outside, flashbulbs burst like tiny lightning. By afternoon, the news broke everywhere. Redstone Properties under tax investigation. The company's accounts frozen, its partner, Lucas Pierce, gone from the city. Reporters called it poetic justice. I didn't answer their calls. Some stories don't need to be told again. That evening, after the crowd had thinned and the courthouse halls were empty, I walked back into the judge's chambers. The secretary nodded me through without asking why. Raymond Cole was standing by the window, his robe folded over a chair, his eyes on the rain beginning to fall again. He turned when I entered. "Mrs. Lopez," he said, and then stopped. His throat moved. For a long time, he didn't speak. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "I knew you were innocent. All those years ago. I saw what your husband did. What they made me sign. I was too cowardly to defy them. I thought the system would eat me alive. So I let it eat you instead." His hands trembled. He looked smaller without the robe. I stood very still. The rain tapped the glass behind him, steady and light. "You can't rewrite the past, Your Honor," I said quietly. "None of us can." He nodded, his eyes wet. But I can carry it differently now. I stepped closer, close enough to see the years carved into his face. Redemption isn't in words, I said. It's in what we do next. He bowed his head. Then I'll start with today. Outside, the rain eased into a soft drizzle. I walked down the courthouse steps alone, the air smelling of wet stone and spring. Daniel was waiting by the car, Leo asleep against his shoulder. When he saw me, he smiled, a quiet, tired smile, the kind that means the fight is over. I touched his arm and looked up at the courthouse one last time. The windows glowed against the gray sky, and for the first time in decades, I didn't see a place of loss. I saw a place where the truth had finally come home. Justice had returned, not as thunder this time, but as peace. Spring came softly that year, like a promise finally kept. The snow melted from the sidewalks, the air smelled of new grass, and the house that once held silence and sorrow, began to breathe again. It had been 6 months since the verdict. 6 months since the gavel had fallen and broken the curse that had haunted our family for decades. The wounds were not gone, but they had turned into scars, reminders, not prisons. Daniel still walked with a cane, but he walked taller now. Each step was steady, sure. The doctors said he might never run again, but he smiled and said, "That's fine. I've got too much to see to hurry." He had gone back to his work, not the grand skyscrapers and sleek offices he once built, but something simpler, purer. He was designing homes for low-income families, small places filled with light and care. "I know what it means to lose everything," he told me one evening. "Now I want to help people find something again." I watched him at his desk sometimes, sketching in the fading light, his cane leaning against the table. The pencil moved in sure lines, and I thought of how pain, when faced with grace, can turn into purpose. Leo played in the garden most days after school. The yard, once quiet and overgrown, now bloomed again. He had planted sunflowers along the fence with my help, tall, golden guardians watching over the family. His laughter carried through the open windows, a sound so full and honest that it healed rooms it touched. Sometimes, Daniel would sit on the steps, watching his son chase butterflies, and I could see the boy he used to be shining through the man he had become. As for me, I had found my way back to the law, not in the courtroom, but beneath the maple tree in our yard, the same tree that had shaded Daniel's childhood and now watched over Leo's. I sat there each afternoon with a stack of case files and a circle of young law students who came seeking advice. They called me Professor Lopez, though I laughed every time they did. They asked about my cases, about justice, about how to stay human in a system that often forgot how. I told them what I had learned too late in life. "The law may sleep," I said one afternoon, closing a file, "but it never dies. It just waits for someone brave enough to wake it." They nodded, their eyes bright, and I saw in them the future I had almost given up believing in. Evenings were simple again. Dinner at 6, Leo's stories at 7, Daniel's quiet gratitude in every glance. Sometimes I caught them both looking at me, Daniel with pride, Leo with wonder, and I thought, this is what victory looks like. Not applause, not fame, but peace. It was late summer when the journalist came. She was young, polite, holding a notepad too small for all the questions she carried. The story of the Iron prosecutor's return had spread further than I'd expected. She wanted to write about the comeback, the triumph, the woman who defied her past. I made her tea and listened to her questions. When she asked for a quote, I smiled and shook my head. "Tell them it wasn't revenge," I said. "It was justice." She looked puzzled. "Aren't they the same sometimes?" "No," I said softly. "Revenge looks backward. Justice looks forward." She nodded slowly, writing it down, though I could tell she didn't fully understand yet. She would, someday. Life has a way of teaching that lesson to everyone. As she packed her notes, Leo came running from the garden, his hair sticking to his forehead, his shirt stained with grass. In his small hands, he carried something large and old, my leather briefcase. The same one that had followed me through every chapter of my life. The trials, the failures, the redemption. "Grandma," he shouted, running up to me. "When I grow up, I'll fight like you." I laughed, surprised by the lump in my throat. I knelt down, and he threw his arms around my neck. His small hands pressed against my back with all the strength of a promise. Maybe, I whispered, hugging him tightly. But promise me something first. What? He asked, his voice muffled against my shoulder. Fight for the truth, I said. Not to win, but to make things right. He nodded, solemn and sure in the way only children can be. I brushed his hair from his face and saw Daniel watching us from the porch, smiling. The evening light wrapped around him like a halo. The journalist lowered her camera, her expression soft. I think that's the ending, she murmured. No, I said, still holding Leo close. It's a beginning. She left soon after, the sound of her car fading down the quiet street. The sun dipped behind the maple tree, casting a golden shadow over the garden. The wind moved through the leaves, whispering something only the old tree seemed to understand. Leo ran off again to chase fireflies. Daniel joined him, his cane tapping softly on the stone path. I stayed where I was, watching them move against the fading sky. Two souls I would have given anything for, now whole again. I looked at the briefcase resting beside me, its leather worn smooth by time and use. I traced the marks on its surface, every scar a story a step toward this peace. I thought of Judge Cole's tearful apology, of the courtroom's silence, of my husband's betrayal long ago, and of the long road that had brought me here. The night deepened. The first star appeared above the garden. I leaned back against the tree and closed my eyes, listening to the laughter in the yard and the quiet hum of life returning to its place. And in the voice of memory, soft and certain, I heard the words that would stay with me forever. Sometimes life brings us back to the battlefield we once fled, not to fight, but to prove that truth still has a place in this world. The wind carried those words through the branches, and I smiled, not as the iron prosecutor, not as the woman who fell and rose again, but simply as Maria Lopez, mother, grandmother, and believer that truth, no matter how long it sleeps, will always rise with the dawn.